We need to help elevate this whole death positive movement. But here's the way that I'm stressing this in many of the conversations that I have. I'm stressing the fact that end of life planning helps reduce the stress of aging. It tends to leave survivors more financially and emotionally resilient. It tends to leave them in a place where they are more likely to get along and less likely to contest final wishes. It naturally results in more meaningful legacies. It often benefits charities because of the immense tax planning benefits of planned giving. It always takes pressure off the courts from otherwise needing to be involved in unorganized estates. And all these things, Niki, help lift the economy.
Welcome to the Digital Legacy Podcast, where we talk about death and dying in the digital age. If you ever asked, how do I protect myself and those I love if something unexpected happened to me? You're in the right place. I'm your host, Niki Weiss, and together we'll explore how to protect yourself in a world where both your physical and digital legacy leave a lasting impact. And welcome back to another episode of the Digital Legacy Podcast, where we talk about death and dying in the digital age. Today, my guest is Greg. Greg, you and I connected on LinkedIn, but it was really about your book, Do Not Ignore Your Mortality. I mean, we have had a significant opportunity to talk about death and dying in the digital age, but you brought it to life, not just from a professional experience, but personal. And if you could, please share your story and what got you here.
Yes, well, thank you, Niki. I appreciate being on your program. My whole message is really to inspire other people to lean into end of life conversations while minds are clear and time is plentiful. And what really brought me here was frustration, actually.
And frustration too with the industry or the medical community?
Well, no, frustration during my initial career as a funeral director. That was my first role when I left high school. I ended up going to mortuary school and became a funeral director at a relatively young age. I worked for large and small funeral homes in Toronto, Canada, where I'm speaking to you from now, just outside of Toronto. But I saw very quickly, Niki, that the vast majority of families that I had witnessed or had been involved in directly as their funeral director, the vast majority were poorly prepared for the death. They didn't know quite often what was to be done. They would say things like, "Well, the deceased never told us what he or she wanted," and it was obviously much harder for them. But in the fewer number of cases where planning was done and people were much more willing to talk about these things before the death, it was so much easier on the survivors.
And it is amazing how avoidancy is just a big part of this conversation. I'm fascinated by it. I'm fascinated by how people are just unwilling to step into the conversation of life is going to happen and part of living is dying and we're all going to die. But yet to plan for it, to have those open conversations, what do you think it is that people are just not willing to lean into it until there's an event?
Well, I'll answer that question in a moment here, Nikki. But I just wanted to also explain to your viewers that I saw the same sort of thing play out when I shifted gears and left the funeral director role. I'm still a funeral director today, although I'm not actively working in that role. But I shifted gears and started. I wanted a change. As I sometimes joke with people, I wanted something more lively. So I shifted towards financial planning and became a financial planner and a certified financial planner actually. And during the process of helping people plan for a good retirement, we're mandated as CFPs to talk to people holistically about, all the things that they need to consider. And some of those things certainly involved the risks that were present that could ruin a good retirement, and a premature death could certainly take the wind out of your sails, or a critical illness, heart attack or a stroke or a brain tumor. but, I saw the same sort of thing play out in that space too, where many people, unfortunately didn't wanna talk about those negative, things potentially happening.
Now, what's fascinating about your story is that for years professionally, you worked, as you mentioned, first as a funeral director and then a financial advisor. And then you yourself, I see you have, if people aren't familiar with it, there's a mask behind you. If you're not familiar with that, it's actually called a radiation mask, which is what they use. Well, and you can explain it. So you have a bit of a story because that's your mask. Is that right?
Well, it is, yeah. It's the mask that the local hospital here made for me because I had to undergo, cranial radiation about a month ago. But I'll come back to that. Let me answer your earlier question, Nikki, and this has to do with, in my opinion, the reasons why people are not more so leaning into these types of conversations while minds are clear and time is plentiful. Th This is the time to be talking about these things. But I think the reasons that people don't are numerous. I think some people are superstitious, and they think if they get talking about these sorts of things, it'll bring bad luck their way. But as Gail Rubin from New Mexico says, talking about sex will not make anyone pregnant, and talking about death will not make anyone die.
But it is a taboo topic, right? Just as, I mean, I think we talk about sex, money, and death. Those are the real top taboo topics. Yet, w- it's interesting that we personally don't talk about it, but we love watching movies and reading books. And if there's not some sort of death defying or living on the edge of life and death, then it's less interesting. So, from an outsider, from an observer, we're very engaged in the conversation and we always want to hear about maybe someone else's struggles, but when it comes to our own and being prepared for it. But it's crazy that when we don't prepare, the chaos that can ensue and has ensued. So, if you yourself had gone through a medical crisis, did you find that your level of conversation needed to deepen?
Well, I was the first thing that comes to mind, Nikki, was the fact that I share in all the interviews that I give was that I felt so relieved that I had my final affairs in order. I had my will set up. I had my powers of attorney, medical directives, and all those sorts of things when I was diagnosed with a brain tumor, fortunately non-cancerous, only 2 months after I published the book. But my publishing coach stressed that it's important to try new things, and I reluctantly created a video just after I told my wife about it, assuming it was cancerous. And while she was on the phone with her girlfriend trying to cope with the news I had just given her, I recorded this very passionate, personal video, not knowing if I'd show it to anyone. And I put it on social media reluctantly, and it went viral. It's now been viewed over 1.7 million times.
And you know what? I'm actually going to give an opportunity for our audience to see that video here.
Well, I just told my wife that I have a cerebral tumor, so I was told 2 days ago. She was devastated. I wasn't sure when I would be best to tell her. This morning I see a medical specialist regarding this brain tumor that I've been told that I have, and I pray that I don't have cancer. And if I do, I've got some pretty serious decisions to make. Well, I just had a CT scan done of my abdominal cavity and my chest cavity. I guess the doctors are wanting to verify that I'm healthy otherwise and don't have any more tumors. When I parked the car, I got out and started walking in and got chatting briefly with the lady in the elevator. And it ends up she's a pastor and just actually finished a funeral and is a pastor at the hospital. How ironic, eh? Anyway, my fingers are crossed, and hopefully this tumor is in my head is the only one, and it's non-cancerous, and I can go on with life. Anyway, I'll keep you informed.
Wow, Greg, that video, really, that's amazing that so many people you know, felt heartfelt for that video. What were some of the comments that you received when you posted it?
Well, all kinds of comments, actually. Most of them were heartfelt, and I did have some people tell me to suck it up, which I thought, okay, well, but that's what you get, right? You put your message out there in the world through the internet these days, and some people are not going to be supportive, so that's fine. But I was very lucky, Nikki, that I came through this relatively unscathed. I had the bulk of the tumor out, and as I said, it was non-cancerous. I have lost all the hearing in my left ear, which was a known factor going into this, but it could have been much, much worse. And even though the residual tumor that is still tightly wrapped around my facial nerves and my brain stem started growing again, and that's why I had this radiation treatment a month or so ago, again, I'm still incredibly lucky, but it sure adds to my story.
And just to be able to be prepared. So the cancer treatment, or well, it wasn't cancer, right? So let's get clear. It was a benign tumor, but you went through the radiation in order to reduce it. But you wrote the book ahead of time. So what inspired you to write this book?
Well, it was really frustration. I always but I had a strong hunch, Nikki, that everything that I had learned, or the primary things that I had learned in the funeral industry about being proactive and talking with family about what you want to have happen, if you want to be cremated or recycled or composted or whatever, those sorts of things, it regardless of the size of one's bank account, was incredibly important. And also from a financial advisor's perspective, of the importance of having a will and medical directives. And so many people just don't have these documents in place. It's surprising, but it's high time that more people realize the vital importance of just and and I know it's tough, it can be difficult to have these conversations, but it's the lesser of two evils.
So, what are ways that we can encourage people to start having these conversations? I mean, from where you sit, not just as a funeral director, but also as a financial advisor, because putting the fear of God in them isn't. I mean, death is imminent, right?
Yeah.
And death is also indiscriminate. Whether it's, the loss of I mean, anywhere from, I think of miscarriages, right? I mean, parents that go through miscarriages or the loss of a child or, early diagnosis with either cancer or ALS. I mean, we can go through the gamut all the way up till and I have clients that are well into their 70s, and they don't even wanna have a conversation, much less plan for incapacitation or, that what if diagnosis. Suggestions, recommendations on how to empower and inspire people to lean into it.
Yes, yes. This is what I've discovered over the last while, Nikki, and I'm stressing this in all the interviews and many of the conversations that I'm having with people because I truly do think it's one of the most inspirational ways of putting a positive spin on this because it is dark, no doubt,
Is it
and I
dark?
know
I mean, well, I wanna
it's
push back. Is there I guess it's from where I sit, why do you have to think it's so dark? I mean, because of the unknown?
well, and the fear of non-existence and the fear of not knowing if our loved ones will be okay. But you're right. We need to help elevate this whole death positive movement. But here's the way that I'm stressing this in many of the conversations that I have. I'm stressing the fact that end of life planning helps reduce the stress of aging. It tends to leave survivors more financially and emotionally resilient. It tends to leave them in a place where they are more likely to get along and less likely to contest final wishes. It naturally results in more meaningful legacies. It often benefits charities because of the immense tax planning benefits of planned giving. It always takes pressure off the courts from otherwise needing to be involved in unorganized estates. And all these things, Nikki, help lift the economy.
It certainly avoids what, I've talked about in another podcast, which is those unclaimed assets. We've spoken to
Yes.
those multiple times where people don't realize that, eh, that when you don't have an estate in order, because life happens. I'm just thinking about, it's July of 2025, and we just went through the horrific floods in Texas. And I'm thinking about those family members, right? That are now have to go through, if they don't find the bodies, right? I mean, we need to talk about that a little bit. If there is a body that got swept away in one of the floods, it could take months, if not years, to be able to settle their estate.
Yes.
I mean, if they can't produce a body and then they have to go to court and to be able to just generate a death certificate, and then from the death certificate, whether there was an estate planning or not, but it is those preparations that life is going to happen. So how can we, again, you talked about death positive. Can you speak more about that?
Well, and that's it's a movement. It's really a movement, Nikki, that you're keenly aware of, and I am too. But I think many of your listeners would find this phrase a bit perhaps odd. But the death positive movement began centuries ago, and one of the more recent initiatives that many people would be aware of is a very, very popular television show, a series called 6 Feet Under, and that was my favorite TV series, by the way, and I'm sure you liked it too. But
6 feet under,
it's
no one's ever, well, for those that don't know about it, can you just, give a little highlight?
yes, yes. Well, it's about a family-owned funeral home in the U.S. and how the struggles of what the family dealt with on a day-to-day basis running a funeral home, and they lived above it, and I can relate to that. But as a funeral director for years, I lived above a funeral home for a period of time. But it was a very compelling and popular show, and, as you said earlier, many television shows and movies, and when we hear about other people's struggles, about, what they have gone through or the fighting, the legal battles, all these sorts of things, we find it easier to be curious about what other people are going through or the mistakes they've made. But as you said, having the courage to talk to our own family members can be tough, and that's precisely why I wrote this book.
And now you talk about the deathbed estate planning. What is that concept?
Yes, well, deathbed estate planning is the concept that is somewhat similar to the hallway huddle that many people within the medical community refer to when they see families gathering outside a loved one's room in a hospital, nervously wringing their hands, wondering and talking amongst themselves, wondering what is to be done next, and realizing that important conversations about what the patient or the deceased had wanted been taken, should have been had um, much earlier.
But again, it's going back to some people just aren't in a position or aren't equipped. I mean, I'm certainly going through it now personally with some family members that are potentially facing an end of life situation. And yet, still, even with all my expertise and resources that I have a difficult time and are still not ready to lean into it to the point where if they were gone tomorrow, things would be buttoned up. And they're
Yes,
not.
yes, and
And no matter how much as a thanatologist, no matter what I say or how I say or, inch them towards it, there's still that, I guess, humanistic, like, reaction, just not wanting to step into that unknown or losing hope.
yes, and you've mentioned that situation to me, Nikki, and I feel terrible for you and your family having to go through that, as I do for anyone. No one wants these sorts of things to happen, but as we're referring to, things do happen. I didn't realize that I would have be diagnosed with a large brain tumor in my skull, but I've worked as a supervisor for one of the largest mortuaries in Canada, where this organization, in one way or another, was involved in more than 100 deaths per day.
100 deaths per day. Oh my goodness. And then how do they manage, the families and that whole
Well,
operation?
a part of the service of this particular organization that likes to keep a low profile as far as the public is concerned, they had significantly large call center. So it was actually the funeral homes staff that were actually dealing with the families. But in one way or another, this organization was involved in over 100 deaths per day and working in the front lines of that type of organization, working with forensics people and the police and the medical community and the funeral home industry, the whole death care. industry front and center was a big eye opener.
That's huge. Well, listen, you are in Canada. So for some of our listeners, they might not know that Canada, the entire country of Canada, the medical aid in dying is legal.
Yes, and medical assistance in dying, MAID, as you referred to it as, which is the acronym, has been legal since 2016 right across all of Canada. And the statistics that I have seen and the webinars that I have listened to and the articles that I've read and so on, Nikki, confirm that the number of people wanting to have control over that last chapter in their life and the number of people who are actually opting for MAID, those who have an irremediable and grievous, I forget the exact wording, but it's very specific, and there are a number of safeguards in place to make sure that it's truly justified for each and every situation. But the number of people, Nikki, who are opting to end their life through medical assistance in dying here in Canada is increasing each and every year.
Oh, and do you what do you contribute that to? Education, availability, accessibility?
Well, I contribute it to, again, a number of things. I don't think it's any one particular reason, but here's a story, a brief story that relates to my own family. Back in October, my cousin ended his life through the MAID program, and he was like a brother to me. He and I were very, very close, and he had a stroke, and he lost use of his left arm and left leg, and he was bound to a wheelchair or a bed, living in a diaper. And his only option was to leave the hospital and be forced into a long-term care facility, and he said to me a number of times, "Greg, this is no way to live." And he started talking about the MAID program, and he started inquiring about it, and he was approved for it. And it broke my heart when he told me this because I knew what was coming, and but I ended up telling him that if I were in his shoes, I may have decided the same sort of option.
I mean, it's a difficult conversation to have,
It is.
and yet, um, I mean, so again, it's July of 2025. Did you see Ozzy Osbourne? Are you familiar with the rock star Ozzy Osbourne?
Yes.
So he apparently just did his last concert and has made the announcement that he's with Parkinson's and has had like extreme pain issues, that he is opting to go to Switzerland to participate in that program.
Yes, and if I recall correctly, Nikki, I believe that company's name is Exit International. I have researched them a little bit, and I've talked to some people briefly about them, but my understanding is, in the articles that I have read, is that Exit International in Switzerland, has the full freedom to end anyone's life, peacefully without any particular, disease issue in the background. If someone just wants to end their life, they can have it done there. But what is most intriguing from what I have, read is the fact that couples will end up deciding to end their life together if one of them is sick and the other one doesn't want to live without the other one being alive.
So I don't know if the media is true, but I know that Ozzy's wife, Sharon, who has also been suffering from cancer, I don't know what their truth is, but I did see one video that said that the two of them were going to go together because her cancer was back. And then I saw another video that she wasn't going. So, but the point that the Swiss organization does allow for couples to go together, right?
Yes.
So I mean, the whole thing is fascinating. And do you feel, I mean, so in the Canada, the rules are much stricter, right? That there has to be a terminal diagnosis, you have to be of sound mind. It's not about mental health issues, where I believe the European or the Swiss program, if you do have like chronic depression or some sort of suicidal idealization, that it could potentially allow you to do that on the Swiss program. Is that right?
I don't know that, Nikki, but I would like to learn more about it myself
Wow.
too. But I do know here in Canada, there are a number of safeguards in place to make sure that it is highly scrutinized and justified, and there are time delays before anyone can be approved for the main process. But the other thing that I want to reinforce to you and your listeners is the fact that I was there in the hospital room when my cousin ended his life,
Oh,
and it was so peaceful, and I can see why many people opt to have this choice at the end of their life if they're living with a terrible disease and have a very low quality of life, and there's no hope. I better understand that now than I did beforehand.
I mean, for those that don't know, in the United States, it's called death with dignity. These are laws that are being discussed, and I know there are 11 states now that have been approved. I think Delaware was the last one. Interestingly enough, Florida has just put it on the docket. So they are now discussing whether to approve death with dignity and medical aid in dying option for people down in Florida, which kind of blew me away. It's a red state. You would think the states would be very specific to some of the pro-choice laws, but maybe this medical aid in dying, it needs to be part of the plan. It needs to be part of the conversation because it does really test people's belief in how they want, quality versus quantity.
Yes, exactly. And we plan everything else in life, Nikki. We plan birthdays and
Right.
anniversaries and trips and goals and objectives and careers. As humans, we crave control. All of us do. And we learned that at a young age when we discovered the word no. So I can,
As an 18-month-old.
that's right. So it only makes sense that all through our lives, if we crave control, more and more people want to have that control at the end of their life too. So
So
it makes sense.
and that's what your book does. It empowers and gives people a roadmap. Can you talk more about, some of the chapters that are in there and questions you might be asking people?
Yes. The When I initially started thinking about publishing a book, creating a book and publishing a book, Nikki, I knew it would not be easy because it's about a topic that many people just simply don't want to discuss. But I was so lucky that my publisher provided me access to a masterclass program that actually was developed by one of the most successful nonfiction authors here in Canada, and he helped change the face of retirement planning across Canada and the US 25 years ago. His name is David Chilton. And I followed his advice and his teachings through this masterclass program, and I'm hoping to help change the face of post retirement planning, as I call it, or estate planning. But I've worked in a fair amount of humor because it is an awfully dry topic, as as you can imagine, but it's a conversation starter. It's intended for the average person across Canada and the US. Other people are buying it in other countries too, but it's intended to get people thinking about what happens if they don't do anything and they just continue to ride it out and not have these conversations versus leaning into the conversations and learning the fundamentals of what they should.
And what they should, the components, right? That legal, financial, physical, digital, and now the digital piece. How have you seen the digital piece change over the last throughout your career? I mean, you
Well,
started how many years ago as a funeral
Well,
director?
I've been a funeral director for 40 years. I've been a financial planner for over 20 years. And as I said, I'm not working actively in either of those roles. I'm simply promoting this book now on a full-time basis. But the whole digital aspect of all of these things, Nikki, as you well know, is taking a greater prevalence in our lives all the time. And that's why, again, it's so vitally important for people to have a will and be organized and make sure that they have someone nominated to step in and settle their estate when they're gone, regardless of the size of their bank account. But from a digital perspective, it's vitally important that we leave things as organized as we can for those that we love.
Now, how have you changed your digital organization of your estate planning over the last couple of years?
Well, I've always been fairly organized in that way, Nikki. But again, this health issue that I went through, it just reminded me about how vitally important it is to always be updating my information and thinking with a mortality mindset that I could be gone at any point, and I want to leave things as straightforward as I can for my wife and my loved ones so that they are in the best position of strength possible.
And what are some of the tools that you use? Uh,
Well, but I use a binder with a pencil and an eraser to keep my
Old
passwords and
school.
such up to date. Very, very low tech, but it does work. But I'm also making sure that those passwords and login credentials, that my wife is aware of them all the time, and paying the bills, trying to put them on auto payments and such to make things as easy as possible if all of a sudden I'm out of the picture or hospitalized or whatever. But the other aspect that's important in this particular book and on my website is that I have come up with a couple of resources that make it easier for people to have these conversations and realize the importance of this. The one is a quiz and the other is a list of questions.
and can you give us some samples of those questions?
Yes. Well, the quiz, I call it the Living Legacy Quiz, and there are only 5 questions on it, and it'll take anyone a couple of minutes to complete it. It's very quick and easy, and it's free. There's no cost. It's available under the resources section of my website, do not ignore your mortality.com. But that quiz will give anyone a quick idea if they're truly prepared. And most people that I have seen, Nikki, really are not as prepared as they should be. But the list of questions, the probing legacy questions, are a curated list of 15 basic questions for icebreaker initial conversations, plus another 15 advanced questions to help people who are more further along in these conversations to really get meaningful discussions moving.
So important. And to let people know that that these conversations that you're having, they're gonna change over time, right? The people who you know, love, and trust in your life today are probably gonna change tomorrow. But if you don't start that conversation, you need that foundation, just that starting point. And I think your book, Greg, it could be a really great place for people to at least to start educating themselves and start building their final playbook.
Yes, yes, I agree. And that's precisely why I created this book, Nikki, was to use it as a tool, as an icebreaker conversation starter for people to realize how important communication is. That's the very first chapter. And then the very basics about will planning and the vital importance of having a will, which is the only way of specifying who is to wrap up your life. And then it talks about the basics of funeral and cremation planning and estate planning, very basic information. And then the fifth and final chapter is about medical directives. These statistics continually reveal that only about half of the adult population in Canada, and it's roughly the same in your country, in the US, has a valid will. And so many of those are so out of date that they're going to cause problems at the time they're needed.
And so now's the time to act. Greg, thank you so much for joining. And with that, we will end our conversation here. If you want to learn more about Greg, all his social media and websites will be in the description. And with that, Greg, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Digital Legacy Podcast, where we talk about death and dying in the digital age. I hope this conversation inspired you to take control and plan for the inevitable to protect yourself and those you leave behind. Don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter at digitallegacypodcast.com. Remember, life is full of surprises. What happens after you die shouldn't be. So keep your passwords safe and your playbook up to date.